Chapter 1. A Famous Business. Ed Valdemar looked down at the papers in front of him, and then at the other people round the long table. Angie Ballantyne, a quiet woman of 25, sat across the table from him. She had a beautiful face, but just then she was tired, and her eyes were red. Her brother Don, who was 2 years older than her, sat next to her. He was worried, and he was watching his sister carefully. Vera Donato, a woman of 45 with dark hair and a strong, confident face, sat on Valdemar's left.
"This is a difficult day for all of us,"
Valdemar began in his deep voice.
"Dawn and Angie have lost their mother and father in a terrible accident. Vera has lost her friends and business partners. As an old friend also, and the Ballantyne family's lawyer for many years, I want to make this as easy as possible for all of you. So let's begin. You are here to listen to the reading of George and Anne Ballantyne's will."
The old lawyer was silent for a minute. Then he began to read aloud from the papers in front of him. His voice, at first quiet and shaking, became louder and stronger. Angie began to cry softly while she listened to Valdemar reading the words of the will. Don held her hand. Vera listened sadly and looked at the large photograph on the wall of Anne and George in happier days. George, a tall man with brown hair, had his arm round his wife, and they were smiling. The reading of the will did not take long. The Ballantynes often talked to their children and Vera about their plans for the future, so there were no big surprises. They were leaving everything to Angie and Don. There were houses in different countries, expensive cars and pictures, and a lot of money. Most importantly, Ballantyne's, the famous New York fashion house, was now in the young people's hands.
Now, you know that Vera is already on the board of directors.
Valdemar went on.
This doesn't change. The three of you will now work together as partners. If anything happens to Dawn and Angie, the business will go to Vera. George and Anne wanted things this way, and it's my job to do what they wanted. Are there any questions? If not, let's finish here. I think that all of us need a rest now.
Without another word, Valdemar put the papers into his bag and stood up. While he and the others were slowly leaving the room, he thought for the 100th time about the strange accident that killed his friends. Was it only a month ago? George and Anne were flying to Boston in their small plane. George was the pilot. They were flying over open country when things went terribly wrong, and the plane suddenly fell to the ground and crashed. The police said that something was caught in the plane's engine, but it was difficult to see exactly what it was. Large numbers of birds or bats were not usual in that place, and nobody could explain it. George and Anne often flew to Boston, and they knew the journey well. It was dark, but the weather was fine. So why exactly did they crash? Valdemar shook his head. Was it just bad luck? Later that day, Angie and Don met Vera in her office to talk about the future of Ballantyne's. Angie walked worriedly around the room, a coffee cup in her hand.
Oh, what are we going to do? You must help us, Vera,
said Angie.
Don and I are new to the business, and we have a lot to learn. Mom and Dad worked all their lives to make Ballantyne's into a famous fashion house. I don't want to lose it all now.
That won't happen,
said Vera confidently.
I worked hard for your father and mother, and I'll work hard for you, too. Ballantyne's is strong, and it can be stronger. I'm already thinking about our next big fashion show in Milan. I'm thinking about wonderful suits, little dresses, big hats, and great bags and shoes. I see unusual colors for Ballantyne's this summer. Bright red, dark gray, and black. I can see it now. It's going to be the biggest and best fashion show of all time.
That sounds exciting, Vera. But how exactly are we going to do it?
Asked Dawn.
Ballantyne's wasn't doing so well when Mom and Dad died. It was starting to lose some of its best people. I know that my mother and father were talking about changing some things. What can you tell us about all that?
I know about it, of course,
answered Vera.
Things weren't going too well, and we've lost a few good people in the last months. Maybe our image has become boring over the last few years. You can't rest in this business. We need new faces and new ideas around the place. We must look for people to bring new life to the business. New blood. There are hundreds of bright young people in New York who would really like to work for Ballantyne's, so I'm not worried. We just have to find them.
Vera spoke confidently, and her words gave Angie new hope. Her brother was not so sure.
Maybe you're right,
said Don.
You know all the important people in the world of fashion. But I have friends in the business too. If you don't mind, I'm going to start right now and make a few phone calls.
Don looked lovingly at his sister.
Take it easy, Angie, and stop worrying. I'll see you later, okay?
Without another word to Vera, Don hurried out of the room. Vera looked sadly after him. With his brown hair and blue eyes, the young man was very like his father. Angie knew that Vera felt sad, and she tried to help the older woman.
You're not alone, Vera,
she said.
Don and I learn fast. I'm not very confident, I know, but I'm ready to work hard.
Vera smiled, but said nothing. The girl was young, and she didn't know much about the fashion world. She needed all the help that Vera could give her. In her head, Vera spoke silently to her dead friends.
Dear George and Anne, I'll never forget you, and I'll always be here for Angie and Dawn. You said that I was the best, and with my help and everyone's hard work, Ballantyne's will soon be the best fashion house in the world. Nothing and nobody will stand in the way of that.
Chapter 2. The New Crowd. Two weeks later, things were already changing at Ballantyne's. A crowd of new people with exciting ideas were working there. One of them was Mylene, a Canadian girl who laughed a lot and was full of life. She was their new buyer, and she had a wonderful eye for interesting colors. Sasha came from a fashion house in Russia. His designs were new and different, and he worked well with Mylene. Ballantyne's was paying them a lot of money.
But they'll make a lot more money for Ballantyne's,
Vera said to herself. Maybe the most interesting of the new crowd was Viktor Serov, Ballantyne's new image consultant. He was tall and pale. He always dressed in black and wore dark glasses. Viktor was funny and charming. He came from Bulgaria and spoke many different languages. His ideas for changing the company image were exciting. He was unknown to Vera, which was surprising because she knew nearly everyone in the fashion world. But he knew a lot about fashion and business. Angie and Dawn liked him immediately when they interviewed him. Vera was not so sure. He was just as confident as she was, and she really did not like that.
He's great, Vera,
said Angie.
Let's give him the job before another fashion house takes him.
Maybe you're right,
said Vera. She didn't feel very comfortable with Viktor. She couldn't explain why, but he was good at his job. Viktor worked hard and fast to change Ballantyne's. Men and women liked him. Mylene secretly fell in love with him. He explained things for hours to Angie and Dawn, and with his help, they began to understand the business better. Vera learnt from him too, and she gave him more work. Soon, the company's image was better than ever.
We did the right thing when we gave Viktor the job,
said Dawn. Vera had to agree with him. Every Wednesday morning, everybody at Ballantyne's met to talk about the past week and to explain their new ideas. Viktor first spoke of his new plan for Ballantyne's on one of these Wednesday mornings.
Listen, everybody,
he began.
I have a new idea. Look.
He showed everyone a large photograph of Angie in a white dress with the words, "The Face of Valentine's" under it.
That's me at the company party last year,
said Angie.
Where did you find that photo?
In the company magazine,
replied Victor.
Of course, I put the words underneath.
Then he turned to the others and went on.
I think that you'll agree. Angie has a great face. The camera loves her, and she is Valentine's. In future, I want to use her as the face of the fashion house. She'll be on the front of our magazine, in all our publicity, always wearing our clothes. Look at her, clever, rich, and beautiful. She's the best of all models for us to use.
Everyone was silent for a minute. Then they all began talking at the same time. A lot of people agreed with Victor.
What do you think, Angie? Will you be our new model?
asked Victor, smiling at her.
I'm not sure,
said Angie, her face becoming red.
I've never done anything like that before.
It's a great idea,
said Don.
People will remember Angie's face and name, and our clothes are just right for her.
Then Vera spoke.
We must be careful with this,
she said.
Firstly, it's going to mean more work for Angie. Secondly, won't it give the wrong idea about Valentine's? Aren't we telling people that we're a small company with no money? If Angie's face is on all our publicity, they'll just think that we're trying to save on models' bills. We don't want that.
Again, everyone was silent for a minute. Then Don replied,
I don't think that what you're saying is really true, Vera. Everybody knows that Valentine's always spends money when it's necessary. You want the company to do well, don't you?
Vera said nothing, but her face was red and angry.
So, do we all agree? Will Angie be the new face of Valentine's?
asked Victor brightly.
Yes, certainly.
Nearly everyone in the room replied excitedly. Vera was silent. She did not agree. But what could one person do against so many? That afternoon, Angie went into Vera's office to talk.
Are you okay?
She asked.
I know that you didn't agree with Victor this morning, but I think that his idea is good. I'm just not exactly sure about being a model.
I'm worried about this, Angie. Nobody ever listens carefully to what Victor's saying because he's so charming,
said Vera.
He knows what he's doing, Vera. I'm sure of that. But if you think that it's a bad idea, I won't do it,
replied Angie.
No. Maybe I'm making a mistake. We wanted to change our image, and this is what Victor has decided. So let's try it,
Vera told her. Alone in her office that evening, Angie called Ed Valdemar and told him about Victor and Vera's disagreement.
What do you think, Ed? Can I be the new face of Valentine's? I've never been a model before.
You're beautiful and bright, Angie.
said Valdemar.
You just need to be more confident. But don't ask me about the model business, because I've no idea.
Later, Valdemar thought more about Victor and Vera.
Both of them are strange.
He said to himself.
Poor Vera's never been the same since George and Anne died. And Victor's come from nowhere and wants to change everything.
He wasn't sure what he thought about Dawn, but he cared about Angie and the company.
It'll be interesting to see what happens to Ballantynes in the future,
thought Valdemar. Chapter 3. Victor is hurt. The next morning, Victor came into the office later than usual. His face was very pale, and he was wearing his usual dark glasses. Round his head, he had a large white bandage. A little blood ran down his face from under it. Mylene was the first to see him.
Victor!
She cried.
What's this? Are big bandages the latest fashion?
She put up her hand to touch Victor's head. To her surprise, he pushed her away and shouted angrily at her.
Don't touch me! Don't come near me! Just stay away!
Mylene felt suddenly afraid. Why was Victor shouting? He usually laughed when she said something like that.
Hey!
Said Sasha, one of the few people at Ballantynes who did not like Victor.
Don't speak to Mylene like that. Who do you think you are?
You'd like to know the answer to that mystery, wouldn't you?
Said Victor, laughing strangely. Just then, Angie came out of her office.
What's happening?
She asked everybody.
What's all the noise about?
I'm sorry, Angie.
Said Victor, smiling at her.
Mylene wanted to touch my head and I shouted at her. I'm sorry. I'm feeling really unwell this morning.
What happened to you?
Asked Angie. Victor took Angie's arm and walked her away from Mylene and Sasha. He spoke in a soft voice in her ear.
Someone hit me on the head in the parking garage. I didn't want to say anything in front of the others because...
What?
Well, I'm not sure. But I think that it was Vera who hit me. When I was lying on the ground, I saw her running away across the garage. I'm sure of it.
Angie was shocked.
What a terrible thing to happen. And you think that Vera did this? But why?
She's jealous of me. She thinks that I'm trying to take the company away from her.
Said Victor.
So she hit you in the parking garage? I can't believe it,
said Angie.
but we can find out easily. Let's look at the CCTV camera. That will show us exactly what happened.
Victor's face was suddenly confused.
Oh, no.
He said quickly.
I don't think that we need to go so far. Let's just forget about it, Angie. Vera and I have to work together. Maybe I'm wrong, and it wasn't her. The garage is dark, after all. Maybe someone wanted to steal some money from me and ran away when they heard something.
But, Victor, this is very worrying,
said Angie, shaking her head.
We must find out what really happened.
Just then, the office phone rang noisily. Sasha answered it.
It's for you, Victor.
He shouted across the room.
An important call from Milan.
Take the call, Victor.
Said Angie.
We'll speak later.
So Victor took the call, and Angie went at once to see Don in his office and told him about Victor's story.
Said
Don.
I can't really believe that Vera did it. But we know that she doesn't like Victor, and I don't think that he'd lie about something like this. Leave things with me, Angie. I'll speak to Vera about it at once.
Minutes later, Vera was in Don's office. She was shocked when Don told her about Victor's story.
Well, did you do it?
He asked her.
Hit Victor?
She cried.
Dawn, you've known me for years. I've never hit anyone in my life. Are you crazy?
Hey there, take it easy,
said Don.
Look, I have to ask you, Vera. You must see that.
He's lying, Dawn. Have you looked at the CCTV camera recording yet?
No, but I'm going to do that right now.
Don went downstairs to the room that had all the CCTV camera recordings in it. While he was sitting in front of the TV, a figure in black with something white on its head came up silently behind him, stood there for a minute, and then went away. Don saw and heard nothing, but he felt strangely tired and confused after that. He watched the recording from the parking garage earlier in the day. He gasped in surprise at what he saw. Victor got out of his car in the garage and walked quickly over to the nearest wall. He then hit his head really hard 3 times against it. After that, he took a bandage out of his pocket and put it round his head. He was alone. Victor was lying after all. Don knew that he had to move fast. He decided to erase the recording because he did not want Angie to watch it. He knew that she liked Victor a lot, and maybe she didn't need to see this. Then he went back to his office and wrote a letter to Ed Valdemar, telling him everything.
Ed must know,
he thought.
That way, if Victor does anything to stop me, Valdemar will have the letter to use against him. And now I must tell Angie to be careful. Victor's lied to us once, and he can do it again. We can't fully trust him after this. I need to speak to Angie. Where is she?
Dawn asked Mylene when she walked past his office door.
She left with Victor a few minutes ago.
Answered Mylene.
They've gone to her house to look at the designs for Milan.
Mylene spoke very unhappily. She couldn't feel the same about Victor Sarav after what happened earlier. Dawn suddenly had a very bad feeling. He must hurry. On his way out of the office, he remembered to mail his letter to Valdemar. Then he quickly got into his car and drove down the road to Angie's house. On the way, he took his cell phone out of his pocket to call his sister. Chapter 4. A Terrible Accident. Vera looked at the two police officers standing at her front door.
Are you telling me that Don Ballantyne is dead?
She asked them both slowly.
Yes, I'm afraid so, Miss Donato.
Said the older man.
I'm very sorry. We know that it's a bad time, but can we come in and interview you? It won't take long.
The men walked in at once and sat down in Vera's living room. Vera sat opposite them.
When and where did you last see Mr. Ballantyne, Miss Donato?
The older policeman began.
At the office this morning,
said Vera, her voice shaking.
we spoke together about one of our workers.
She explained to them about Victor and all about his story of what happened to him in the parking garage.
And later, Mr. Ballantyne drove to his sister's house?
Yes, I wanted to talk to him again, and Mylene, our buyer, told me that he was going to Angie's. Was it an accident?
Vera asked.
We think so. He was driving and talking on his cell phone to his sister when it happened. He shouted something about a huge bat flying into the windshield. Then he went off the road and crashed into a tree. He died immediately,
said the policeman.
Oh, poor Dawn, and poor Angie,
said Vera.
First her father and mother die in a plane crash, and now her brother dies in this car accident. It's terrible.
We have to ask you this, Miss Donato.
The policeman went on.
Did anyone want to hurt Mr. Ballantyne, do you think?
Vera was silent for a minute before she spoke.
I don't trust Victor Saraf, our image consultant. He told Angie that I hit him in the parking garage this morning. Well, I didn't do it. So we know that he lies about things.
The younger policeman spoke now.
But, Miss Donato, Victor Sarav has an alibi. He was with Miss Ballantyne at the time of the accident. Are you saying that Victor did something to Dawn's car? our men can't find anything wrong with it.
I don't know what he did,
said Vera slowly.
but he did something. I can feel it.
The older policeman shook his head.
We need more than that.
He said,
Feelings aren't enough when we're talking about a possible murder.
Angie's beautiful face was pale, and her eyes were really red from crying. Vera went and put her arms round the young woman.
I'm so very sorry, Angie,
She said softly.
Why did it happen, Vera? I can't believe it. First Mom and Dad, and now Dawn. It's all too much,
said Angie.
I know. You poor girl. And both of them strange accidents, too.
Vera went on.
What do you mean?
Asked Angie.
Well, your father was a good pilot, and Don was a good driver. The plane and the car crashed after something flew into them. The police spoke about birds or bats. It's all very strange.
Stop saying things like that, Vera. They were both just terrible accidents. Nothing more.
Cried Angie.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry,
said Vera softly. She walked to one of the front windows in Angie's house and looked out of it into the street.
Angie,
She said,
have you looked at the CCTV recording of the parking garage yet?
Yes, but there's nothing on it.
replied Angie.
Maybe it wasn't working. I can't think about that now. But Victor says that he was wrong about you. Now he says that a thief hit him and ran away. He wants to forget it. And he wants to look after me, he says. He's so kind, Vera. You know, you and Victor are the two most important people in my life now.
A week later, Vera was working in her office one morning when there was a sudden knock on her door. Victor walked in confidently and smiled at her.
How are you, Vera? I've come to say that I'm sorry about last week. I was wrong about you. Let's forget it and work together on the Milan fashion show. Poor Angie is still weak and can't help much, I'm afraid. We two must work harder than ever to help her and Valentine's.
Vera looked stonily at the young man.
Victor, maybe you can fool Angie, but you can't fool me,
She said.
You want Valentine's all for yourself, and nothing is going to stop you, is it?
Victor smiled strangely at her.
I don't know what you're talking about. You don't have any proof of anything, do you? It's your word against my word. Be careful, Vera. After all, you have things to hide, don't you? Angie can't find out about you stealing money from your dear old friends, can she now?
Vera's face was suddenly very white.
How did you find out about that?
She gasped.
Don't be surprised, Vera Donato. I can read people like books.
Said Victor.
So let's be friends, huh? Let's do what's best for Angie and for Valentine's. Okay?
Vera said
Okay.
quietly. Victor was right. She had no proof of anything, and she had a terrible secret to hide. A few years before, when her mother was in hospital, Vera borrowed a lot of money from the company without telling either George or Anne. She had plans to pay it back, but after some time, when nobody said anything about the money, she forgot those plans. The company had a lot of money, and Vera thought that she was safe.
How can Victor know about it after all this time?
She said to herself.
Maybe he'll tell Angie and Ed about the money, and they'll never trust me again. I'll lose everything.
She watched through the open door after Victor left her office. Angie was sitting at a table by the window, looking at some designs. She was very thin and pale. Victor walked over to her and put his arm round her. She looked up at him and smiled sadly. More than ever now, the poor girl needed someone to look after her. Chapter 5. A Vacation in Bulgaria. That year's spring and summer fashion show in Milan was in late October. It was a great success for Ballantyne's. Everybody loved their unusual summer clothes in black, red, and gray. Angie was a beautiful model with her pale face and large, sad eyes. Victor and Vera were in Milan with Angie. When the fashion show finished, the three of them met back at their hotel.
Let's drink to Valentine's and to a very successful future,
said Victor, with his glass in his hand.
To the future.
They all said.
And now you must rest for a few weeks, Angie,
said Vera.
Your face is so tired.
I agree,
said Victor.
I have an old family house near Varna in Bulgaria. Why don't you go there? It's a nice, quiet place. The old housekeeper can look after you. Vera can go too.
Oh, yes! Let's do that, Vera!
Cried Angie.
I've always wanted to see Victor's family house.
More than anything, Vera wanted to hurry back to New York.
What will Victor do there, alone at Ballantyne's? He's planning something,
she said to herself. But she had to agree to this vacation. Victor knew too much about her, and she couldn't say no.
And maybe I'll learn something about him when I'm there in Bulgaria,
she thought.
We'll take 2 weeks vacation in Varna,
she said, smiling at Angie.
And then go back to Ballantyne's.
Not much happened during their vacation. Victor's house was old and falling down, but the old housekeeper was kind and looked after them well. She spoke a little English. In the first days of their vacation, Vera tried to ask the old woman about Victor's past life.
When did he come here? What happened to his family?
She asked. But the housekeeper just shook her head and smiled. Maybe she didn't understand. After that, Vera asked her no more questions. There were also, she saw, no old photographs or pictures of the family in the house to help her. Angie slept a lot in the garden, and soon Vera too began to rest. Victor called to say that everything was going well at the office. So Vera read her magazines, went for long walks, and tried to forget about work. After 2 weeks, Angie was still pale, but she felt better. Vera was in a hurry to get back to Ballantyne's. Both women wanted to see Victor again, but for different reasons. Vera wanted to stop his plans for changing the company. Angie was falling in love with him.
I knew it. Victor's changed everything,
said Vera to herself. She was back in her office in New York, and she was shocked.
Oh, yes. I found some new people. And some of the old crowd have gone. They weren't working well,
said Victor when she asked him about it.
It's a stronger company now. We mustn't be afraid of changing things.
But why aren't Sasha and Mylene here?
Asked Vera.
You always said that they worked very well.
The smile suddenly left Victor's face.
Something terrible happened, Vera. They found Sasha and Mylene dead in a back street last week. There was blood everywhere. The police think that it was murder. They were near a club, Black's. It's always full of strange people. I think that Sasha and Mylene were drinking there just before they died. I didn't tell you about it because you were on vacation and needed to rest.
And do you know anything about their deaths, Victor?
Asked Vera.
No,
replied Victor.
nothing at all. It's terribly sad. But New York can be a violent place. You know that, Vera.
Vera walked back to her office.
I don't believe him,
she said to herself. She immediately called Fleur, a young designer who was working at a rival fashion house.
Hi, Fleur,
she said.
How are things, dear? I've just heard the terrible news about Sasha and Mylene. You knew them both well, didn't you?
Yes,
said Fleur.
and I was with them at Black's that night, just before they died.
Was there anything unusual about them?
Asked Vera.
No, they were happy, laughing and dancing.
Explained Fleur.
But I remember one strange thing. They spoke to Victor Sarav. He arrived while we were there. He wasn't happy to see Sasha and Mylene. I think that he was angry with them about something. He was shouting at them, but there was no fighting in the club. Soon after that, Sasha and Mylene left.
Did Victor leave with them?
Vera asked interestedly.
not long after. Why?
Fleur replied.
Oh, nothing. I'm just trying to understand exactly what happened that night.
Vera explained.
I see.
Fleur went on.
You know, I think that Sasha was in love with Angie Ballantyne, and that Victor was jealous of him. That was maybe the reason for their disagreement.
Yes, maybe. Thanks, Fleur,
said Vera. She put the phone down, held her head in her hands, and thought for a minute. Then she called Angie, who was at home, still tired after the long plane journey back from Bulgaria. Vera gave her all the news about Ballantyne's. She also told her about Sasha and Mylene's deaths.
I didn't want to say this to you, Angie, but I must. Victor is dangerous. Violent things happen around him all the time. You must be careful. I'm very worried for you.
Don't worry about me.
Answered Angie.
For me, Victor is strong, not dangerous. He's done so much for Ballantyne's in the past months. He cares about me, Vera. You can't say anything to change that. Please leave him alone. Like he says, New York can be violent and terrible things happen. I trust him. You must trust him too. I'm finishing this call now, before you say anything more against Victor.
With that, Angie ended the call. Vera put the phone down slowly. She suddenly felt very tired and alone. Chapter 6. Vera is too late. In the following weeks, Vera became obsessed with Victor Sarav. Was he really as bad as she thought? She needed to find some proof somewhere to show it. But where? And how? One night, she stayed behind after everyone left the office. First, she went to Victor's computer and turned it on. But it showed her nothing interesting about him. Next, she went back to her office and used her computer to look on the internet. She quickly wrote the name Victor Sarav and waited. A lot of news stories about him came up on the screen.
That's better,
she said to herself. There was some news about his work for Ballantyne's and the success of the Milan fashion show. But there was nothing about his time in Bulgaria or in any other fashion houses. Then Vera saw something strange. How old was Victor exactly? Nobody knew. In some of the stories, he was in his 20s. But more often, he was older. Some of the stories talked about a man who was over 60. How was that possible? His face was young, and he moved like a young man. Was he lying about that, too?
This man is a real mystery,
Vera said to herself.
What exactly is behind all of this?
Vera waited a few more days. In February, Victor went to London for an important fall and winter fashion show.
He's away for 5 days and is coming back on the weekend. It's now or never,
thought Vera.
I must find out more about that man.
She decided to visit Victor's apartment that Friday. The doorman at the apartment building knew Vera. This wasn't her first visit, but she usually arrived together with Victor and Angie.
Hi, Jim,
she said.
I have to take some designs from Victor's apartment, and he's away at the moment. Can you open the door for me, please? I have a key, but I left it at the office, I'm afraid.
Sure,
said the doorman. They took the elevator to Victor's floor. Jim opened the door to Victor's apartment with his key, and then went back downstairs in the elevator.
What a piece of luck,
thought Vera. She went inside and looked around. Victor's apartment was cold and very tidy. The walls were white and all the things in the rooms were black or red or gray. Everything was in its place. In the living room, there were a lot of magazines. In Victor's bedroom, the closet was full of modern and expensive black clothes. She went into the kitchen and opened the cupboards there. There was surprisingly little food. The refrigerator was nearly empty, too.
That's strange,
said Vera.
Doesn't this man eat?
Yes, I do. But I like different things from other people,
said a voice behind her. Vera turned round quickly. Victor was standing at the door, looking at her.
Victor! What are you doing here?
Cried Vera.
I live here, Vera,
he replied.
Now, can I ask you the same question?
Vera thought quickly.
I needed a company magazine from last year,
she said.
There weren't any of them at the office, and I know that you always keep some at your apartment, so I came to look for one here.
Victor laughed.
Then why are you looking for it in the kitchen? It's okay. Don't lie. I know why you've come. You don't trust me, and you want to find out more about me. Well, there's nothing here, so you can forget it. Do you know why I've come back a day early? I wanted to surprise Angie. I bought a ring for her in London. She's going to marry me, Vera. So you see, I've won and you've lost. Angie will never listen to you now because she's going to be my wife. She belongs to me.
Vera gasped.
You can't do this. You can't marry her. Soon after you came to Ballantyne's, things began to happen. Terrible things. Dawn died, then Sasha and Mylene. You're always there when there's an accident or a murder. Nobody can see it, only me. You don't love Angie. You're just using her.
You're wrong about that,
said Victor coldly.
I love Angie very much, and she loves me. We want to be together for the rest of our lives. Why can't you be happy for us? People ask too many questions. You ask too many questions. Be very careful and think before you speak, Vera. You can fight me, but you can never win against me.
Victor took off his dark glasses. He looked long and hard at Vera. His eyes were black and strangely empty of life. She suddenly felt very cold and afraid.
Who are you, Victor?
She asked, her voice shaking. Victor's face suddenly changed before her eyes, and he gave her his most charming smile.
I'm the successful image consultant for Ballantynes, and soon I'll be the husband of Angie Ballantyne, the beautiful face of our very successful company.
Vera was furious.
Yes. And you'll be very rich then, won't you, Victor?
She said.
Are you going to do something with that old family house in Bulgaria? It's falling down, isn't it? And your old housekeeper needs some help too, doesn't she? Oh, yes. Angie's money will be very useful for all of that.
Victor looked back at her furiously for a minute, but then he smiled charmingly once more.
Well, that's my business, isn't it? And if you're rich, Vera, it's because you're nothing but a thief. Please, leave now before you say anything more. You can't stop me, Vera, because I know too much about you. The wedding is next week. Angie and I don't want to wait. She's happy and she needs me. So don't do anything to change that.
Vera opened her mouth to speak, but she felt very afraid of Victor now. She wanted to scream and shout, but she said nothing. There was something really evil about Victor. But what was it? She still had no proof. Silently, she turned round and walked out of the apartment. She could feel Victor's cold eyes looking at the back of her neck while she was leaving. Just when she reached the door, she felt a strong hand on her arm, and she jumped.
Don't forget what you came for, dear Vera,
said Victor. And he gave her last year's company magazine. When she was in the street again, she looked up at Victor's window. She could see him standing there, watching her.
This isn't the end of it,
Vera said to the dark figure.
I'm not finished with you yet.
Vera took her cell phone from her bag.
Please tell me that it isn't true, Angie.
She said to herself.
Please tell me that you're not going to marry Victor.
Angie answered the phone and said immediately,
Oh, good. It's you, Vera. I wanted to call you. I have some wonderful news. I'm going to marry Victor. Please say that you're happy for me.
So it was true. For a minute, Vera could not speak.
Yes, I know, Angie. I've just seen Victor, and he told me. It's wonderful news.
I'm so excited. I'm looking at wedding dresses now. But there are too many, and I can't decide. I'm not even sure about the color. What do you think? White or gray? Or maybe even red? Vera, you have to help me. I want to be beautiful on my wedding day. can you come to the office? Maybe we can decide on my wedding dress together?
Yes,
answered Vera.
of course I'll help you, Angie. I'll be there in a few minutes.
When she finished the call, Vera thought that she heard someone laughing evilly. The noise came from somewhere high above her. Chapter 7. The Wedding. A week later, Angie married Victor. She was very pale and beautiful in her long white wedding dress. It was made by Ballantyne's, of course. Ed Valdemar thought that Angie was too thin, but the other guests did not agree. Most of them worked for Ballantyne's, and they thought that being very thin was really beautiful.
Oh, she's wonderful.
They all said.
Like a world-famous model. Just right.
After the wedding, there was a big party for all the guests in Angie's garden. At the party, Vera and Valdemar began talking.
You're right, Ed. Of course she's too thin. I don't think that this wedding is good for her.
Yes, maybe you're right. It's very soon after everything that's happened. But I think that it'll be the right thing for Angie in the end. Victor loves her, and he's very good for the company too, you know.
They looked across the garden at Victor, who had Angie in his arms. She was smiling, but her face was very tired, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Victor, who was in his usual black clothes, was kissing her neck again and again hungrily.
He's taking the life from her,
thought Vera.
He's taking her blood like a vampire. Yes, that was it, a vampire. But how can I think like this in the 21st century? I'm going crazy. Vampires belong to old stories about times long ago.
You're very quiet.
Said Valdemar.
Are you okay?
No, I'm not,
said Vera.
I don't feel very well. I know that this wedding is a terrible mistake.
Some of the other guests were listening to their conversation, and they turned and looked at Vera with shocked faces.
She's jealous.
They said.
She's jealous of Victor's success. And she's angry because she isn't the most important person at Ballantyne's now. That's why she's trying to spoil the wedding.
Valdemar was angry with Vera, but he felt sorry for her too.
Look, Vera, you can't worry about this now. It's too late for that. Victor did a dumb thing when he hit his head in the garage and said that it was you. But I think that he wanted Angie to feel sorry for him and to care for him. Sometimes we do dumb things when we're in love.
Vera looked at Valdemar. Her face was confused.
What are you saying, Ed? How do you know that Victor hit himself in the parking garage?
Don sent a letter to me before his accident. He saw Victor hit himself on the CCTV camera recording, and he wanted to tell me about it. Don erased the recording because he was worried about Angie seeing it. He thought that maybe it wasn't so important, and I agreed. That's why I said nothing.
Vera was furious.
Not important? It's important to me. Victor lied about that. And he lies about everything. He's evil. He's violent. I know that he killed Dawn. Maybe he killed Sasha and Mylene too. Why didn't you tell me this before? What have you done, Ed? What's going to happen to Angie now?
A lot of the guests standing around them were looking very uncomfortably at Vera now. Valdemar took hold of Vera's arm with one big hand, and he spoke to her quickly and quietly.
Vera, please, stop this crazy talk. It's Angie and Victor's wedding day. I know that you're unhappy, but you mustn't do this. You're wrong about Victor. He's good for Angie. Please, don't spoil everything for them.
But you don't understand.
Vera said.
Angie's in the most terrible danger.
Vera pulled herself away from Valdemar and ran from the garden. Valdemar watched her go and shook his head sadly.
Poor woman. She's been half crazy ever since George and Anne died so suddenly in that plane crash.
Victor looked up when Vera ran past him to the house.
Excuse me.
He said to Angie and the guests who were near them.
I must go into the house for a minute.
He walked through the house to the front door, quickly opened it, and looked up the road. Yes, he could see Vera in the street. She was in a hurry, running to her apartment, which was not far from Angie's house. Victor followed Vera to her apartment building. She took the elevator up to her floor, the 13th, and Victor flew up the stairs. His figure made a shadow on the wall like a huge bat. Just after Vera opened the door to her apartment, Victor came up quickly behind her and pushed her inside. Vera screamed and fell to the floor. Victor put his hands round her neck and looked hard into her face.
You've gone too far this time,
he said coldly.
You tried to spoil Angie's wedding day.
You're crazy, Victor!
Screamed Vera.
You're crazy and evil, and you murdered Dawn, and poor Mylene and Sasha. I'm sure of that now. Did you kill George and Anne too? I need to know.
Yes, Vera, I did,
said Victor.
When I first read about Angie on the internet, I became obsessed with her. I knew that I wanted her as my wife. I just needed to find a way to meet her. So I decided to take a job at Ballantyne's. George and Anne's deaths were necessary for my plans to work. That's why I sent bats into the engines of their plane, and it crashed. The other deaths just happened. They were people who began asking too many questions and spoiling things, so they had to go.
But you're not just a murderer, are you?
Gasped Vera while Victor's hands closed around her neck.
You're more than that. You're a vampire. And you're taking the lifeblood from poor Angie's body
You're making her into a vampire too.
She put out her hand and pulled off Victor's dark glasses. He smiled back at her, and Vera looked squarely into his face and saw the centuries of evil behind his cold, dead eyes. She began to scream and scream. Victor took her head in his strong hands and hit it violently against the floor, time after time. He put his mouth to her neck and drank her blood thirstily. At first, Vera fought back, her arms and legs moving wildly. Little by little, she began to move more weakly. Victor hit her head one last time, and then he stood up and looked down at Vera's still body, now with no life in it at all. He took her bag, opened it, and quickly threw all the things inside it onto the floor.
You can't be too careful in New York, Vera,
he said.
There are thieves and murderers everywhere.
Then he put on his dark glasses and carefully washed Vera's dry blood from the corners of his mouth. After that, he opened the door and left the apartment. Minutes later, he was back once more in Angie's garden. Angie was laughing with some of the guests. She saw Victor and called out to him.
Where have you been, darling? The party just isn't the same without you.
Victor came over and put his arm round his wife.
I had to make a phone call about our honeymoon. I was asking for a special room in the hotel. I want only the best for my darling Mrs. Saraf.
The wedding guests smiled at Victor. What a charming and caring man, they thought. And he loves Angie so much. This is the wedding of the year. Valentine's is a great success, and we're all going to be rich. One of the guests took his glass in his hand.
To Victor and Angie,
He said loudly.
and to their wonderful future together.
Everyone held up their glasses.
To Victor and Angie.
They all cried happily. An hour later, Angie and Victor got into their car to go to the airport. The guests went into the street to say goodbye to them. Angie smiled at all her friends.
I haven't seen Vera for a while. I wanted to say goodbye to her. Do you know where she is, darling?
Asked Angie.
No, but don't worry about her. She's fine.
Said Victor.
She told me today that she's very happy for us. We can put all our disagreements behind us now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Said Angie, touching his pale face with her fingers.
I'm so lucky to have the two of you.
Chapter 8. The Honeymoon. Angie and Victor flew to the Bahamas for their honeymoon. Their hotel was a beautiful white building with a lot of tall green trees all round it. Their rooms were very large, and they were full of vases of white and red flowers, which had a wonderful smell. Their balcony looked onto a beautiful white beach and the bright blue ocean.
This is truly special, Victor. Thank you so much,
said Angie, kissing her husband lovingly. They took their clothes out of their suitcases and put them away in the closets. Then they changed out of their New York suits and put on summer clothes, all in Ballantyne's colors of black, red, and gray. Victor looked in the refrigerator and took out 2 cold bottles of tomato juice. He made 2 long red drinks and brought them out onto the balcony. Angie was waiting for him there. They lay down side by side on long white beach chairs out of the sun. Both of them put on their dark glasses.
Would you like to go swimming, my darling?
Asked Victor.
Not today. Thank you, darling. I need to rest after our journey here. Maybe tomorrow. Oh, why do I always feel so tired when I travel by plane? I mean, I'm just sitting in a plane seat for hours, reading, eating, looking out of the window at the sky. What's so hard about that?
Are you very tired, my darling?
Asked Victor kindly.
Yes, I am,
said Angie.
But that's not surprising, really. The wedding was so exciting. It was wonderful, wasn't it? Everyone was so kind. Of course, we'll need a bigger house for all the presents. But it all went so well, and I'm pleased about that.
Yes, my darling. You know, everyone at Ballantyne's is very happy for both of us.
And I'm happy too. But I can't stop thinking about Vera. Why hasn't she called me? Is she all right?
Don't worry about Vera, my darling. The days of my disagreements with her are finished now. Remember?
Yes, I remember. That's good.
Just then, the news came on the large television in their hotel room. The sound was turned down, but from his beach chair, Victor could see the television screen. There were words traveling along the bottom of the screen, and he read them. Famous fashion house partner dies fighting thief at home.
Yes,
Victor thought.
Vera died fighting, all right.
She was a strong woman, and she did not go down quickly. Of course, as a vampire, he was stronger than her, but he really enjoyed killing Vera because she fought for her life. He really enjoyed drinking her blood, too. It was so exciting. She was a good rival. Killing Don and his mother and father, on the other hand, was boring. His bats did all the work for him then, flying into the engines of George's plane, hitting the windshield of Don's car. What was interesting about that? Then there were Sasha and Mylene. Sasha once saw himself as a rival for Angie's love. What a poor, weak fool. Angie was far too good for him. And Mylene, as soon as she turned against Victor, was so boring. He just had to kill them both to teach them a lesson. Their deaths were very easy. He used his knife once for Sasha, and once for Mylene, and they fell to the ground without a sound. There was a lot of knife crime in the streets near that club.
The police will be busy for a very long time trying to find Sasha and Mylene's murderer.
Victor thought, and he laughed secretly inside himself. He looked again at the TV screen. The words now on the screen were about Valentine's. Fashion house tragedy. 6th death.
Ah, well. No publicity is bad publicity,
thought Victor.
Of course, Vera's death is going to be hard on Angie. But with me at her side to help her, Angie's soon going to forget Vera Donato and feel happy again. I'll never tell her that Vera was a thief. My job now is to please Angie and to help her to stay happy for centuries and centuries.
He stood up and went into the room. He turned off the television and took a white flower from one of the vases. He walked back out onto the balcony and gave the flower to his wife, who smelled it and put it in her hair. They stood side by side together and looked out at the dark blue ocean. The sky was beginning to go red and orange. The shadows under the trees were darker and longer now. He said,
The sun's going down. This is my favorite time of day. I'm a real night bird, you know, Angie.
Me too.
said Angie.
That's lucky, isn't it? I loved lying in the sun when I was younger, but now I feel really uncomfortable doing that. And of course, I need to be pale and interesting. A red nose just isn't right for a model in a fashion photo.
She went back to sit on her beach chair, and Victor went and sat down beside her.
Angie, my darling, don't you understand? You're becoming a vampire. And vampires don't like bright sun.
He said silently to himself. Angie noticed the little smile at the corners of Victor's thin mouth.
Why are you smiling? What are you thinking about?
Asked Angie.
I'm thinking about our next vacation,
answered Victor.
Why don't we go to Bulgaria in the fall? You liked it there. And I haven't visited my house in Varna for a very long time. We can go after the next Paris fashion show.
What a good idea!
Cried Angie.
You know, I want to spend a lot of our money to make your old home beautiful again.
Me too,
said Victor.
And maybe this time you can meet some of my family in Varna.
Your family?
Said Angie.
But Victor, I didn't know that you had any of your family left there.
Oh yes, I do,
replied Victor.
I come from an old Bulgarian family, you know, very old. The Saravs go back to the 16th century.
Then why didn't I meet any of them before?
Angie asked.
You didn't meet them because I didn't think that it was a good idea. Not before the wedding, you know.
Explained Victor.
They're an unusual crowd, shall we say. But now you're my wife, and there's no turning back. I know that they'll be very pleased when they meet you in Varna. There's my sister, my 3 brothers, my mother and father. My grandmother on my mother's side of the family, my grandfather on my father's side, and his father too. They'll be really happy when they learn that new American blood is coming into the Sarah family.
The soft sound of the ocean under Victor's voice was so restful, and Angie wasn't listening very carefully to her husband's words anymore.
Oh, good. That's nice.
She replied.
Well, I really can't wait to meet all of them.
She lay back on the beach chair and smiled happily. Victor looked at her beautiful face and the 2 small red holes in her long white neck. He suddenly felt thirsty for blood, but he decided to wait until later that evening to drink. He spoke silent words to Angie in his head.
When you have your bath tonight, my darling, I'll go to you. I'll take all the blood from your body, and I'll give you my vampire blood to drink. You won't die, my darling. You'll be born again before the morning as a full vampire, like me. And then, then we'll have all the time in the world to be together.